October 12, 1944, a military transport truck rumbled through the gates of Camp Huntsville, Texas, carrying cargo that would challenge everything the American guards believed about their enemy. Inside sat 43 German women, members of the Wehrmacht's auxiliary services, captured during the Allied advance through France, exhausted, frightened, and entirely unprepared for what awaited them. As the truck halted in the central compound, the canvas covering was pulled back, revealing the women to their American captors. What followed in the next 60 seconds became a story passed down for generations, a moment of striking cultural confrontation that transformed both prisoners and guards forever. At the back of the truck sat 22-year-old Greta Schneider, clutching a small cloth bag containing all she owned, her heart pounding with dread. She had served as a radio operator in occupied France, believing propaganda about defending the fatherland against weak, indulgent Americans. She had been told American soldiers were soft, undisciplined, and physically inferior, and that capture meant certain humiliation. Bracing herself as she prepared to step down, she froze mid-step, her eyes widening in disbelief. Before her stood the guards assigned to the women's compound, a row of towering figures unlike anything she had imagined. At the front stood Sergeant Mike O'Reilly, a former Chicago steelworker standing 6'4" and weighing 230 pounds of solid strength. Beside him, Private Tommy Wilson from Alabama, 6'2" and built like the machinery he once operated, and Corporal James Henderson from Minnesota, whose sheer size seemed capable of lifting the transport truck itself. Behind Greta, 20-year-old Liesel Hoffman whispered in German, trembling with nervous astonishment, saying they were enormous, and that the propaganda had never mentioned such men. Several women murmured agreement, their fear mingling with confusion, and the faint realization that something fundamental had been false. Then 19-year-old Frida Kleen spoke softly, her voice carrying both irony and wonder as she looked at Sergeant O'Reilly, saying she thought Americans were supposed to be weak and small, and that one could probably use her as a toothpick. Nervous laughter followed, fragile yet liberating, breaking the suffocating tension and shattering years of indoctrination. The following morning, October 13th, brought their first full day under camp routine, offering new chances to observe the Americans controlling every detail of their existence. Breakfast was served in the wooden mess hall, its benches and tables reminding Greta of a Berlin school cafeteria. Yet the food that awaited them brought another unexpected shock. Generous portions of eggs, bread, and fruit sat before them, an astonishing contrast to the months of meager rations endured. The women hesitated briefly, marveling at the abundance that almost felt indecent after so much deprivation and uncertainty. As they ate in small, quiet groups, American guards patrolled through the hall with rhythmic precision, their boots echoing softly against the wooden floors. The women whispered among themselves, unable to ignore the imposing size and strength of their captors, whose very presence seemed larger than life. Frida, always the sharpest tongue among them, had declared herself the group's unofficial commentator, masking her unease beneath layers of humor. She spoke rapidly in German, gesturing subtly toward the guards as they passed, her tone a mixture of mock analysis and mischief. That one, she noted with a flick of her hand toward Corporal Henderson, looked as though he wrestled bears before breakfast. And that one, she added with a grin toward Private Wilson, probably ate an entire cow each morning. The women bit back laughter, their shoulders trembling as relief mingled with fear in strange harmony, humor becoming their fragile refuge in captivity. Private Tommy Wilson, meanwhile, noticed something peculiar during his patrols, as the German prisoners kept exchanging glances and whispering behind lowered heads. Their expressions puzzled him, lacking both defiance and resentment, instead filled with quiet amusement that seemed wholly out of place in a prison camp. At 23, Tommy had never been outside Alabama before joining the army, let alone faced foreign prisoners whose demeanor defied his expectations. He had been told to expect hostility, yet these women appeared strangely entertained by his presence. During a shift change, he approached Sergeant O'Reilly, voice low with concern, suggesting that the women might be plotting something. The sergeant, seasoned by experience with German soldiers, observed the group briefly before his stern face softened into faint amusement. "Wilson," he said evenly, "they're not planning anything. They're laughing at us." The young private blinked, taken aback by the notion that enemy prisoners might find humor in their situation. O'Reilly chuckled quietly, explaining that these women had likely never seen Americans before, their surprise born from propaganda's failure to depict reality. The myths of starving, desperate Americans had shattered upon seeing tall, well-fed guards who looked more like farmhands than soldiers. Tommy nodded slowly, still unsure whether to feel insulted or oddly proud, struggling to make sense of their fascination. The quiet tension eased days later on October 15th, when Greta, Lissel, and Frida reported for duty in the camp laundry facility. Surrounded by stacks of crisp linens, the women worked alongside several other prisoners, folding and sorting beneath the hum of machinery and faint smell of soap. Sergeant O'Reilly stood near the doorway, overseeing the detail, with the quiet authority demanded by camp regulations. The women worked silently, but Frida's irrepressible nature soon broke the calm rhythm of their task. In hushed German, she leaned toward Greta and whispered that the sergeant had to duck each time he entered the room, imagining his head striking every doorway in a normal German house with low ceilings. The thought made Greta stifle laughter, but a sharp, involuntary snort escaped before she could stop it. O'Reilly's head turned immediately, his gaze locking on the sound, and the women froze in place, their hands moving rigidly over the laundry as silence filled the air. For several tense seconds, the sergeant simply watched them, his expression unreadable. Then, to their astonishment, he walked toward their table instead of barking a reprimand. The women straightened instinctively, bracing for punishment. Instead, O'Reilly smiled, a small but unmistakably human gesture. "You know," he said slowly, his words deliberate, "I can tell when someone's talking about me, even in German." The women exchanged uneasy glances, uncertain whether to laugh or remain silent. Frida, unwilling to retreat from the moment she had created, decided to respond. She had secretly studied English from a tiny book hidden in her belongings, and now she gathered her courage. Looking up at the towering sergeant, she said with careful effort, "You are very tall. We are surprised." Her honesty and broken English carried a disarming sincerity that made O'Reilly laugh, a warm and genuine sound that filled the sterile laundry room. It was the first time the women had heard an American guard laugh, and the sound felt strangely comforting. Lowering himself slightly to meet their eyes, O'Reilly continued speaking slowly. "Where I come from in Chicago," he explained. "This is normal size. Many men are tall." He grinned and asked, "Were you told Americans were small?" Greta, whose English was slightly better, nodded uncertainly. "Yes," she said, struggling with the words. "Propaganda say Americans weak, small, not strong." The sergeant's amusement faded, replaced by quiet reflection. He seemed to grasp in that instant how profoundly they had been misled. "Well," he said softly, "I guess propaganda lies." The truth in his tone lingered in the air like an unspoken truce. Both sides recognized that they had been deceived by the same machinery of war, each made to fear the other. For the first time since their capture, something shifted within the German women. Not trust, but the fragile beginning of understanding. November 23, 1944, would soon bring events that deepened that fragile human connection. Thanksgiving Day, the camp commander had authorized a special meal for all personnel, and after some discussion, decided to include the German prisoners in the celebration. Captain Elizabeth Warren explained the concept of Thanksgiving to the assembled women through their interpreter, describing it as a day when Americans gave thanks for abundance and blessings. The women listened politely, yet nothing could have prepared them for what appeared on their plates that afternoon. Turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes with gravy, cranberry sauce, green beans, rolls with butter, and pumpkin pie. It was more food than most of them had seen in a single meal for years. Liesl stared at her overflowing plate with something approaching disbelief. "This is for prisoners," she whispered to Greta in German. "What do they feed their own soldiers?" The question was sincere, not rhetorical. The contrast between what they had been told about American weakness and deprivation versus this display of abundance was staggering. Around them, other women reacted similarly. Some ate slowly, savoring every bite, while others seemed almost afraid to touch the food, as if it might vanish or be some kind of trick. Frida, ever practical, simply began eating with enthusiasm. "If this is prison," she announced to her table mates, "maybe we have been on the wrong side." After the meal, the guards organized an impromptu recreation period in the yard. Private Wilson had brought a football, thinking some of the men on guard duty might want to toss it around during their break. Instead, he found himself trying to explain American football to a group of curious German women who had ventured outside to walk off their enormous meal. The football itself confused them. "Why is it that shape?" Greta asked in her improving English, pointing at the oblong ball. "Why not round like proper football?" Wilson realized she meant soccer. The explanation that followed involved many hand gestures and demonstrations that left both sides more confused than enlightened. Sergeant O'Reilly joined the attempt to explain, tossing the football to Wilson in a gentle spiral. The women watched the ball rotate through the air with fascination. "You throw it like that always?" Frida asked, mimicking the spiral motion with her hand. O'Reilly nodded, and on impulse, offered the ball to her. "Want to try?" Frida hesitated, looking at the other women for permission or encouragement. "Go ahead. What's the worst that happens?" she heard. Taking the football awkwardly in both hands, Frida attempted to throw it. The ball tumbled end over end, traveling barely 10 feet before hitting the ground. The guards didn't laugh. Instead, Wilson jogged over, retrieved the ball, and spent several minutes showing her the proper grip and throwing motion. Soon, half a dozen German women were attempting to throw the strange American ball, their throws growing slightly less awkward with each attempt. The guards offered tips and encouragement, naturally falling into the role of coaches rather than captors. It was messy, chaotic, and filled with laughter from both sides. In that moment, beneath the autumn sun of Texas, enemies became merely people attempting to understand each other's unfamiliar customs. December arrived with colder winds, bringing a subtle but noticeable change to the camp's atmosphere. The early jokes about the guard's size had gradually transformed into something far more meaningful. Genuine conversations, constrained by language barriers but rich with significance, began to emerge during work details and brief moments of recreation. Greta found herself increasingly captivated by these exchanges. Her English improved steadily, and with it came the courage to ask questions that had haunted her since stepping off the transport truck. One afternoon in early December, she approached Sergeant O'Reilly during a supervised task in the camp library, where prisoners organized donated books and magazines. "Sergeant," she began cautiously, "may I ask something?" He nodded, setting down the stack of books he carried. "When we arrived here, we were told Americans are small, weak people. Nothing like what we see," she gestured toward the guards. "Why do they lie about something so obviously untrue?" O'Reilly considered her words carefully, recognizing their depth. He pulled up a chair and motioned for Greta to sit. Speaking slowly, he said, "If they lie about small things, you do not question the big lies. If you believe Americans are weak, you assume Germany can win easily, and you do not ask hard questions about the war." Greta absorbed this, her expression troubled. "What else is lies?" she asked softly. "What else have we been told that is not true?" The sergeant's face darkened. "That, Greta, is something you must discover yourself. I cannot tell you what to believe, but we were deceived about Germans too. We were told you were all monsters, all evil." He looked at her directly. "You are not monsters. Only young people caught up in something larger than you understood." His words struck her with unexpected clarity, the realization that ordinary people on both sides were manipulated, feeling revolutionary. That evening, Greta gathered several women in the barracks, and after lights out, speaking quietly in German, she recounted her conversation with O'Reilly. The discussion stretched for hours, Liesl raising the question that terrified them. If Americans were portrayed as weak, what about everything else? What about the reasons for the war and the truths we were taught to fight for? Even Frida, usually light-hearted, was serious, admitting, "I have been thinking about Thanksgiving, the meal, the food, prisoners fed better than Germany's own soldiers toward the end. What kind of weak, failing country does that?" The women wrestled with cognitive dissonance, both painful and strangely liberating. Every act of kindness from the guards, every demonstration of American abundance, every unexpected display of humanity, slowly eroded the foundation of beliefs they had long held. Anna Vogel, who had remained silent throughout most of the conversation, finally found her voice. "Perhaps the cruelest deception," she whispered softly, "was convincing us that questioning was forbidden, that doubt signified weakness. Perhaps that was how they prevented us from seeing the truth." The women sat in near darkness, each absorbing in her own way the unsettling awareness that their entire worldview had been constructed on lies. January 9th, 1945 brought news destined to obliterate whatever illusions about their homeland still lingered. Reports emerged from advancing American forces in Europe, uncovering concentration camps and meticulously documenting atrocities. Camp Huntsville received newsreels and photographs intended for German prisoners as part of a re-education effort. Captain Warren wrestled with the decision of whether to show the material. Unlike hardened SS officers or Wehrmacht auxiliaries, these women seemed genuinely unaware of the Reich's most horrific crimes. She resolved that they deserved to confront the truth about what they had unknowingly supported, but arranged the viewing with guards present who had established rapport with the prisoners. The women entered the recreation hall, perplexed by the sudden gathering. A projector was ready, and Captain Warren stood before them, her expression solemn and resolute. "What you are about to witness," she said through the interpreter, "is painful, but real. It is what American soldiers discovered in Germany and Poland. This is the Reich's truth." As the lights dimmed, the newsreel began, filling the hall with sobs and startled gasps. Images of Bergen-Belsen, skeletal survivors, mass graves, and the machinery of systematic death flickered relentlessly. The women sat frozen, horror and disbelief etching every face as comprehension dawned of something too monstrous to fully absorb. Greta felt her stomach churn, knowing the Reich was harsh, aware of camps for political prisoners, yet unable to fathom systematic extermination on this scale. Beside her, Liesel wept openly, hands pressed to her mouth to stifle cries, while Frida remained perfectly still, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. When the reel ended, no one moved. The lights returned, revealing a room of women in varying stages of emotional collapse, some crying, some frozen in stunned silence, others visibly ill. The interpreter began to speak, but Captain Warren raised her hand. "Let them process," she whispered. Sergeant O'Reilly approached Greta, who stared blankly, her face drained of color. He crouched beside her chair. "Greta," he said softly. She did not respond. He tried again. "This is not your fault. You did not know." At last, she met his gaze, the depth of anguish in her eyes, undeniable. "How could we not know?" she whispered in English. "How could this happen in our country? And we not know?" He had no answer that could offer comfort. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "evil hides itself behind words like duty and patriotism, making people look away from questions they should ask." That night, the barracks were filled with quiet crying and hushed conversations. The women held one another, trying to process the impossible reality that they had served a regime capable of such horror. Their jokes about the American Guard's size felt childish and trivial now, a lifetime ago rather than just 3 months. Everything had changed. They could never return to the innocence of not knowing, and the weight of that knowledge would shape every decision they made going forward. The weeks following the newsreel screening marked the darkest period in the camp's history. The German women moved through their daily routines like ghosts, mechanically performing tasks, but showing none of the curiosity or gradual warmth that had been emerging. The guards noticed the shift and did not know how to respond. Even the kindest gestures seemed inadequate against such profound grief and shame. By late January, Captain Warren grew genuinely concerned about the prisoners' mental state. Some had stopped eating properly, others barely spoke. The transformation from cautiously optimistic captives to deeply traumatized young women was heartbreaking to witness. It was Greta who finally broke the cycle of despair, though in a way no one expected. On February 3rd, she approached Sergeant O'Reilly with a request that caught him completely off guard. "I want to make a show," she said in English. "A performance for the guards and for us. Comedy, music, anything to help us remember how to laugh." O'Reilly was skeptical, a talent show seeming almost tone-deaf given what the women had learned about their country's crimes. Yet Greta's earnest expression halted his immediate refusal. "We cannot live in darkness forever," she explained. "What we learned is terrible, but we are still alive. We must find a way to live fully, not just exist." The sergeant brought the idea to Captain Warren, who was equally uncertain, but ultimately agreed. If the prisoners wanted to organize something positive, it might aid their recovery. Permission was granted for a talent show on February 14th, Valentine's Day. Though the irony was lost on the German women unfamiliar with the holiday, Greta threw herself into organizing the event with surprising intensity. She recruited other prisoners, encouraging them to share any talents they possessed: singing, comedy sketches, even magic tricks, anything to bring a moment of lightness to their heavy reality. Frida hesitated at first. "How can we perform comedy?" she asked Greta privately, after everything they had learned. Greta's reply was simple but profound. "Because if we let evil steal our ability to laugh, to find joy, to be human, then it wins even after it has been defeated. We must show that we can acknowledge terrible truth and still choose to live fully." Her words resonated, and slowly other women began participating. Liselle, with her beautiful singing voice, agreed to perform. Anna Vogel, who could perform surprisingly accurate impressions, prepared a gentle comedy routine, and even the quietest prisoners found small ways to contribute, turning the preparations into a form of therapy. Women who had barely spoken in weeks began collaborating, rehearsing, and occasionally laughing during practice sessions, while the guards watched this transformation with amazement. Private Wilson remarked to O'Reilly that it was like watching flowers bloom after a frost. The German women were choosing resilience over surrender, teaching their American captors something profound about the human spirit's capacity to heal from even the deepest wounds. The talent show on February 14th exceeded all expectations, with the recreation hall filled with guards, administrative staff, and all 43 prisoners. Greta served as master of ceremonies, introducing each act in her now fluent English. Liesel sang German folk songs that moved several guards to tears, despite not understanding the words, while Frida's comedy sketch about her first encounter with American football had everyone laughing until their sides ached. Anna's impressions of various camp personalities, delivered with affection rather than mockery, brought the house down, and for 2 hours the weight of history lifted just enough for everyone to breathe. After the show, something fundamental had shifted. Barriers between guards and prisoners became permeable in ways that unsettled some camp leadership. Private Wilson spent long conversations with Frida about their childhoods on farms, teaching her English idioms while she taught him German phrases, their friendship growing naturally from respect and genuine curiosity. When questioned by other guards, he said simply that she was a person deserving dignity, not a number in a camp roster. Sergeant O'Reilly and Greta developed a mentorship that transcended prisoner-guard boundaries, discussing American democracy and German culture before the Nazis, often under watchful eyes. By March, several German women expressed a shocking desire. They wanted to stay in America. Greta voiced it to Captain Warren, explaining she had no family left in Germany, that her country no longer existed, and that here she had learned freedom and dignity, becoming a better person. The captain listened with concern. Legally, they were enemy prisoners, not immigrants, and no framework existed for such requests. Word spread quickly, dividing opinion. Some guards supported the women's transformation and potential new lives, while others, mourning wartime losses, felt enemy nationals should not remain. The debate grew heated, and newspapers soon picked up the story. The women at Camp Huntsville became symbols in a broader national dialogue about forgiveness, redemption, and the obligations America might hold toward former enemies who had sincerely transformed. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day arrived with a mix of relief and uncertainty at Camp Huntsville. While Americans across the nation celebrated openly, the German women prisoners confronted the looming reality of repatriation. Official directives had arrived from Washington. Most would return to Germany within weeks, processed first through displaced persons camps, before being released to whatever remained of their previous lives. On May 15th, Captain Warren convened a General Assembly to share the details. 43 women gathered in the Recreation Hall, the same space where 3 months earlier they had performed their talent show. The atmosphere was heavy with both anticipation and unease. "Transportation will be arranged by the end of the month," Captain Warren announced. "You will receive documentation, basic supplies, and passage to European ports. From there you will be processed and released to return to your homes." She paused, her voice softening. "I want you to know that your conduct here has been exemplary. You have shown extraordinary growth and dignity." Several women began to cry quietly. Greta raised her hand, speaking in clear English before translation could be offered. "Captain, what about those of us who requested to remain?" The question lingered in the room. Warren's expression revealed the strain of the impossible situation. "The requests are under review at the highest levels," she replied carefully. "But I cannot make promises. Most of you must prepare for repatriation." The finality of her words hit like a physical blow. Lizelle buried her face in her hands, while Frida stared at the floor, her usual humor absent entirely. Even the guards appeared unsettled, some visibly troubled at the thought of sending these women back to a devastated country where family and security were uncertain. Private Wilson stood near the rear, jaw clenched, silently wrestling with emotions he could not display in his official capacity. That evening, the women gathered in small clusters to weigh their options. Most had accepted the inevitability of return, prepared to face Germany's ruins with whatever courage remained. Yet 9 women, led by Greta, made a collective decision to formally petition the American government for refugee status, arguing that they had no homes to return to and had demonstrated genuine commitment to democratic values. The effort was unprecedented, legally complex, and a long shot, but they felt compelled to try. Sergeant O'Reilly assisted in drafting the petition, working late into the night to articulate their case in precise legal language. The following weeks were agonizing. Days passed with no response from Washington, even as preparations continued for mass repatriation. Women who accepted their return began saying farewell to the guards who had become friends, exchanging gifts, recording addresses, and promising to write letters. Private Wilson gave Frida his home address in Alabama, his voice thick with emotion as he said, "If you ever make it to America, you have family there." And she embraced him, both of them crying openly, no longer caring who saw or what regulations they might be breaking. June 20th, 1945 arrived, the day of repatriation, as 34 women boarded transport trucks bound for the port in Houston, their faces reflecting determination mixed with sadness, carrying letters of recommendation from Captain Warren and personal notes from guards who had become friends. They would return to Germany as ambassadors of an unexpected truth, that enemies could become human to one another, that transformation was possible even in the darkest circumstances. The 9 women who had petitioned to stay watched their friends depart, uncertain if they would ever see them again. 3 days later, a telegram arrived from Washington, bringing news that would change their lives forever. The petition approved, granting the 9 women provisional refugee status, allowing them to remain in the United States under sponsor supervision, with a path to eventual citizenship. The celebration in the camp was jubilant but bittersweet. Freedom won at the cost of separation from friends who had shared their journey. Greta stood in the now half-empty barracks, holding the official papers that promised a new life. tears streaming down her face as Sergeant O'Reilly found her, and she assured him, "These are happy tears, but also sad ones. I have lost one home and gained another." And he understood completely. The 9 women scattered across America, building new lives with determination and grace. Greta becoming a translator for the State Department, marrying an American diplomat, and raising 3 children who grew up bilingual, while Frida moved to Alabama, welcomed by Private Tommy Wilson's family, marrying him in 1947, their wedding a symbol of reconciliation that made local newspapers. Liesl pursued nursing, working at a veterans hospital, caring for American soldiers who had fought against her countrymen, her gentle compassion becoming legendary among patients and staff alike. The others forged their own paths, contributing to their adopted country, while never forgetting their origins. Yet the story's most remarkable chapter came in October 1970, when Greta, now in her late 40s, organized a reunion at the former site of Camp Huntsville. 31 of the original 43 women returned, traveling from Germany and across America. Joined by retired Sergeant Michael Riley and his wife, Captain Elizabeth Warren, and Private Tommy Wilson, with Frida and their 4 children, living proof that former enemies could build families together. They gathered in what had once been the recreation hall, now a community center, sharing stories, shedding tears, and laughing. Frida's humor undimmed by 25 years, joking about Sergeant O'Reilly's height as she had decades before. In that moment, surrounded by people once divided by war, but now united by shared history and genuine affection, the true victory emerged, not the military victory of 1945, but the human victory of choosing understanding over hatred, redemption over revenge, and laughter over despair, proving that even in humanity's darkest hours, kindness and humor could build bridges across any divide.